Hello and good evening. Welcome to Israel Insider with me, Ashley Perry. As usual, I'll be speaking for about 15 minutes and then I'll have a question and answer session for another 15 minutes. So if you have any questions, please put it in the chat and I'll endeavor to get to it after my opening remarks. Really, in Israel, there's really only one place to start, even though it's probably not as of great interest around the world. But we saw today and yesterday some remarkable scenes of some Zaka. Those who know the organization, they're usually involved with picking up body parts and finding, possessions of people, who are killed or maimed or injured in terrorist attacks. And we saw Zaka scuba divers off the coast of Herzliya roaming the sea floor for hours and hours on end, about a dozen of them from what I could see of the pictures. And a lot of people, who just saw these pictures will be wondering, well, what's this all about? So what we have to do is we have to take you back a number of months. I can't remember exactly when it was, but there were these pictures coming out of a detention facility in Israel for those suspected of being involved in the October 7th massacre, Nukhba, Hamas terrorist elite squad who came over the border and massacred and raped and injured and burnt, hundreds, it's not thousands of people if we include the injured, etc. And if one remembers, there was this scene that made around the world where some prison guards were recorded allegedly abusing one of these Hamas terrorists. At one point, it was there were accusations that were raping him, etc., which weren't actually in the end in the accusations because these prison guards or soldiers, or whoever they were indicted, are indicted in Israeli courts for various offences, abuse, etc. But the question at the time was, how were these recordings released? How did the media get hold of them? How did they make their way around the world? And they're supposed to be internal security cameras. Well, this week, really, we got our answer. And apparently, the answer really goes to the very top of the IDF legal system with the military attorney general, who apparently, if she herself did not leak them, was certainly aware of it and may have even been the one to direct the leaking herself. And now, why is this controversial? Because throughout the month since then, she has denied being involved. Her office has denied being involved. They said that they were themselves investigating the leak. But apparently, since the new Shin Bet head came into office, one of his, I guess, immediate briefs was to get to the bottom of the release of these recordings. And apparently, the evidence led pretty immediately right up all the way to the head of the IDF legal system, the military attorney general, and she was indicted or accused. She, before she was indicted, she resigned her position, and everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Usually, in these circumstances, someone would be arrested or at least cautioned, as we've seen in many other cases. But for some reason, she wasn't, perhaps because of her position. And at one point, when she was supposed to come into questioning, suddenly everyone lost contact with her. And there was this bizarre scene. The whole country didn't know what happened to one of the most prominent figures in the IDF. And there were rumors that she was either had or it was in the middle of committing suicide. There was talk of a letter that she left for her family, etc., etc. The family apparently notified the police. The police tracked her phone to a beach in just off the coast of Herzliya, which is just north of Tel Aviv. And the police in the end found her. It's not clear exactly what happened, whether she was in the water, whether she was clothes were wet, whether she was just on the beach. There's a lot of rumors going around about this, but the most important piece of evidence from this was her phone, which apparently she threw in the water. And that's what led to these remarkable scenes, because apparently the phone itself is major evidence, which will say exactly who was involved in the leaking, whether she herself was the one who leaked it, whether she was one who gave the directive, who else in the office, etc., etc. Apparently, she's in no fit mental state to be questioned at this time. But it really has become a major, major scandal in Israel. And it's really one that has captured the attention of the Israeli public, again, has split how you feel about it, largely whether you're in favor of this government or whether you're against. If you're in favor of this government, it really does speak to what they've been saying since they first got into office in 2022, that the legal establishment has to be reformed because they are completely unaccountable. They do whatever they want. They are ideologically smitten. They will try do anything to go against their ideological opponents, etc., etc. If you're against this government, most people admit that what she did was wrong. It was illegal. It was against her office, against the interests of her office, against the state of Israel, against its soldiers, made them look bad, etc., etc. But there's been a witch hunt against her. And while she herself shouldn't have done what she did, the events as they were shown in the video happened, and there's no getting around it. The broader context of this is extremely vital when one looks at the political scene, because, as I said, one of the major, major ideological underpinnings of this government from the beginning, and really October 7th, sort of changed everything, was the reform or the overhaul, depending how far you go, of the current legal system, the unaccountability, as the current government talking heads would have it, the fact that their ideology prevents the government from doing a lot of what they want to do. Members of the government would say that during the war they had their hands tied behind their back because of the ideologically dovish legal system, and really this is the greatest example of where the legal system has gone awry. It's basically allowed to do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, regardless of anything else. This is a very good point for Netanyahu and some of his other partners to go into elections, because it really is the aha, I told you so moment. Because when there was talk of perhaps involvement of the military attorney general, it was slammed down by all of the opposition, the civilian legal apparatus, all the way up to the attorney general, who is the bête noire of the current government, is the biggest punching bag, the greatest evil in the country is the current attorney general, if you ask many members of the government. And the fact that she would not allow and countenance an investigation, that's what the accusation is, really, really is a very comfortable playing field for Netanyahu as we approach a year, perhaps less, until election. So while the event itself was really a major drama this week, as I said, with a suspected suicide of a very major public figure, some illegal, leaking of what should be a legal matter within the army. The fact is that this really is something which is going to give the current government a major platform in an election year. So it really was the biggest talking point in Israel over the last week. Obviously, there are a lot of other things going on. One of the biggest things that's happening in Gaza at the moment is the situation of 200 Hamas terrorists who are apparently stuck in tunnels in Rafah, which is in the beyond the yellow line, which is in IDF-controlled area under the ceasefire. And apparently they can't get out, and they want to get out, and Hamas wants them to get out. And there's been all these negotiations, exactly what's going to happen to them. At one point, there was talk that they will be released back over the yellow line into Hamas-controlled Gaza. But when that was released, as one can imagine, more hawkish elements of the Israeli government and even some in the opposition said it's ridiculous. Why are we letting these Hamas terrorists out, especially for free? And also, let's not forget, these are the Hamas terrorists who've already killed quite a number of IDF soldiers since the ceasefire. There have been a number of sniper attacks which have cost the lives of a number of IDF soldiers since the ceasefire. So to let them out and just wander across the yellow line was obviously seen as unpalatable to many in Israel. So there was a bit of a U-turn by the government. Now it appears that they're trying to come to some sort of arrangement. There's talk of maybe swapping their return for the body of Hadar Goldin. Let's not forget Hadar Goldin is the only body that's still there, not from the October 7th massacre, actually from a previous operation a number of years ago. I think it was 2021, if I'm not much mistaken. But the fact is that, and others are saying, well, we can only let them out if they go to a third country, they disarm, they swear never to get involved in terrorism again, and all this sort of things that we've heard before. But what we do know is that the Americans are putting a lot of pressure on Israel to solve this issue. Israel is saying at this point, there's only one solution. Either they're killed or they surrender and they're under arrest to Israel. But the Americans want something else. They said that this perhaps could be a good example of what we've been talking about, Hamas members basically disarming, giving up their arms, giving up a life of terrorism. And it could be a good example moving forward. That's not something that's changing too many heads in Israel. Again, Israel now appears to be taking a more maximalist point of view. They, the heads of the Israeli government wanted this issue to be dealt with very quietly, but once it got out, they put up a hard red line. The Americans are trying to negotiate along with Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar. We'll have to see how this works out, but at the moment, the parties are far apart. But as we've seen in almost anything that's happened since the ceasefires come in, if President Trump decides it's going to happen in a certain way, that's the way it will happen. At the moment, the Trump administration is desperate for this ceasefire to hold, so they want this situation to be dealt with. But it will be a test case. Let's be honest. The ceasefire talked about the return of all of the hostages, living and dead. Hadar Goldin was on that list. So now to pay for something you've already paid for seems very bizarre, and especially considering these are people who are not just sitting there idly or passively. These are people who have actually been involved in, murdering Israeli soldiers even after the ceasefire took place. So this is a bit of a political hot potato for Netanyahu to try and navigate. Again, on the one hand, he wants to stand tough, he wants to be hawkish, but on the other hand, he's not going to say no to the Trump administration if it really comes down. Elsewhere in Gaza, there still seems to be a major debate over what's happening with this international stabilization force. We don't know who's going to be involved, what they're going to be doing. Again, Israel does not want Qatar and Turkey involved because of their association with the Muslim Brotherhood, of which Hamas is the Palestinian chapter of, and because of their hostile position towards Israel. Egypt is the other possibility, but Egypt is relatively weak. Again, if any of these countries, or Indonesia, or Kazakhstan, or some of these others, what are they going to do? How are they going to disarm Hamas? Hamas are not going to give up their weapons. They've already said that. So it's very unclear what exactly this international stabilization force is going to be, who's going to populate it, and what exactly it's going to do. And every day that passes and nothing is happening, Hamas are firming up their presence. They're regaining control. They're murdering more of their political and personal opponents, and really just retaking the parts of Gaza that it controls under the ceasefire. And we could be back to a certain extent with, not necessarily square one, obviously, but to a point where Hamas is firmly entrenched in power, both governmentally and militarily. There has been talk of some sort of reconstruction beginning in the Israeli-controlled area that could become a good model for a new future at Gaza, to entice Gazans from the Hamas-controlled area to the IDF-controlled area. But again, those who are going to put their money, the hand in their pocket, like Qatar, etc., are not going to give the sort of money we're talking about, the tens of billions or whatever it is, to areas under Israeli control. So again, we're at a bit of an impasse on many, many different arenas. On the northern border, there's become a certain level of concern within Israel that Hezbollah are also rearming, and the Lebanese government isn't doing what it promised to disarm Hezbollah. So Israel has been, taking out as many sites and senior Hezbollah leaders as it can. And we've definitely noticed that uptick in attacks. Israel's losing its patience with President Aoun, who has promised by the end of the year to disarm Hezbollah, to only have one weapon in Hezbollah, and that's in Lebanon, I should say. And the only guns in town should be held by the Lebanese army. At the moment, Israel doesn't believe there's enough movement on that. There's enough seriousness on that. So we're certainly seeing an uptick in attacks there. But it's also about sending a message. And the international community has to put more pressure. There is a will. It is believed, or I certainly believe it, by the Lebanese government. They just said doesn't seem to be a way at this point in time to actually do it. And they haven't really put as much power where it needs to be on the border and disarming Hezbollah, at least south of the Litani River. Finally, another important domestic issue is the muscle that was flexed very much by the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel last Thursday, where they brought at least a couple of 100,000 out to the streets for what they called a prayer, but it was more like a demonstration against a potential enlistment law. We've talked a lot about this in previous weeks. But what we are starting to see is Netanyahu worrying more and more about this issue. He sees this as the major issue, which is going to decide whether his government remains in place until elections this time next year, or whether they fall and he's forced to go to early elections, as we've spoken about many times. If a budget won't be passed by the third month, by the end of the third month in Israel, we automatically go to elections. And at this point in time, no budget can be passed or any laws are being passed when the ultra-Orthodox parties are boycotting the Knesset. We saw again, I was in the Knesset earlier, no laws were passed by the government simply because they didn't have a majority because of the ultra-Orthodox. Ironically, or not, perhaps it's all about timing. An opposition party, Israel Beitenu, tried to put up a law today which says one simple thing: those who don't serve, either in the military or national capacity, will not have the ability to vote. That didn't pass. It got voted down. It probably was never going to pass, and it was more about, again, putting a marker down for towards the election cycle. But certainly Netanyahu is getting worried about the position of the ultra-Orthodox, the maximalist position. And it seems now, according to many analysts, that he is starting to move towards some sort of enlistment law. For many months, he was just trying to put it off and hoping that he would just get to the elections without having to pass it, or maybe giving some gestures to the ultra-Orthodox. But now it seems that what he might do is try and pass whatever he can pass and hope that enough time will then pass before the election cycle that people will forget about it and they'll focus on other things. And Bibi will be able to deflect attention onto something else, what he would describe as some of his achievements. I'll have to wait and see what's happening there, but there does seem to be movement on that, where there certainly wasn't even a week ago. If this law is passed and if it is moving forward in a concerted way, what that tells us is that Netanyahu has, in his mind, set the elections for as far back as possible. We have to have elections by October next year, but that will mean probably the date will be as close to that. If they're not able to pass it, it might well mean that elections are closer than we think. And now I'm going to see if I can see any of the questions. What Barak, I can't see the full names here, asks, what is your opinion on Ambassador Barak's allegations about Turkey-Israel rapprochement? It's certainly in the interests of the US for this rapprochement to happen. President Trump likes President Erdogan. He's obviously close to Israel, so he would certainly like to see some rapprochement. Erdogan himself has not been doing much in that direction. There was a point a couple of weeks ago when some analysts thought that maybe the tone had been, calmed down a little bit from some of the more greater incitement that President Erdogan had used against Israel over the last couple of years. But we've heard more recently, some really disgraceful remarks by a sitting head of state towards a so-called ally, or at least a country that has relations with, describing Israel as a Nazi state and all these other things. So while it's certainly in Israel's, in the US's interest to have rapprochement between Turkey and Israel, it doesn't seem that President Erdogan feels any sort of pressure to calm down and tone down his rhetoric. So I don't think that's in the offing at the moment. Let me go through some other questions. Why is the government unable or unwilling to prevent settler violence during the olive harvest in the West Bank? That's a question by Carrie Hellebrand. It's a very thorny issue. Again, settler violence is not as great as some around the world would have it, and certainly in the international media, we're talking about a few tens of settlers, Israelis who live over the Green Line, and we're talking about the most extremist elements within that society, because there's 500,000 Israelis who live over the Green Line, and we're talking about no more than a few dozen who go to certain areas and cause trouble. It's usually around, as was pointed out by Carrie, around the olive harvest, but it's very, very difficult to do that. You can imagine chasing just a few dozen people around quite a large area. So it's not a matter of being unwilling or unable. Well, it's more unable. It's, Israel is still fighting a war on many fronts. Hamas in the south with Hamas, with Hezbollah, worrying about what's going on in Iran, etc., etc. So it certainly doesn't have the manpower, and you can feel that in places around Israel. That it goes back to that question about the ultra-Orthodox enlistment. Israel is missing 12,000 soldiers. That's no secret. You can find that in many articles on the subject. Israel's very, very short on not just soldiers, but also law enforcement, which is part of the military and security apparatus. So it's very difficult to find a few dozen people running around, sometimes in the middle of the night, cutting down a tree here or there. So it's more the unable rather than unwilling. But I would just also state that this idea of settler violence has really been blown out of proportion. For every violent act by a settler, and of course there are dozens of violent attempted terrorist attacks by Palestinians, which go unreported. So it seems like it's very one-sided. And there's a question here by Eric Selkoff: with the new mayor of New York saying he would arrest Bibi if he enters New York, do you think that worries Netanyahu? I don't know. He was just in New York for the UN General Assembly, and the likelihood is he won't be back in New York until next year, in which case I'm sure if he thought that there was any chance of him being arrested, he wouldn't come. But again, let's not forget the New York mayor doesn't have responsibility over things like diplomatic affairs. And if the U.S. administration gives him the okay to enter U.S. airspace and land and be around, then it's highly unlikely that any police would try and arrest him. And let's not forget as well, it could create not just a diplomatic incident, perhaps even a security incident, because Netanyahu doesn't travel anywhere, like many heads of state, especially the Israeli head of state, without major security and intelligence, etc., etc. So I'm not sure how the NYPD are going to arrest someone with dozens and dozens of highly trained, not just Israeli, but also American special forces around. So I don't think that's going to happen. It was more of a campaign speech. Perhaps the incoming mayor will repeat his statements, but at the end of the day, these types of issues are not dealt with by mayors. They're dealt with usually at the diplomatic level. So I don't think that will be a problem, and I'm sure it will be something that will be worked out one way or another by next September. Let's have a look for other questions. Trying to find. What is Israel going to do about the Houthis? That's also a question from Eric Selkov. At the moment, nothing. Since the ceasefire, the Houthis, who basically said all throughout the war that they will cease firing if there is a ceasefire, that they're only acting on behalf of the Palestinian cause. And as long as Israel is attacking Gaza, they will attack Israel. But there hasn't been a single rocket, a single drone since then. The Houthis are not Israel's problem. They're the world's problem. They are causing problems with one of the major shipping lanes of the world that basically traverses between Africa and Asia and Europe. And, even recently they attacked a boat just off the coast of Yemen. And this is something that the Houthi problem, first of all, it's a problem for Yemen, and the legitimate government in Yemen is obviously has been trying for quite a while with its partner in Riyadh to get rid of the Houthis, who they believe are illegally occupying territory in Yemen, and they're not the legitimate government. So first of all, it's an internal Yemeni problem, but more importantly, it's an international problem. It's not Israel's problem. It's quite far away. It was a complex operation to launch missiles against Houthi military installations and Houthi military leaders, but it only did that within the context of reacting to Houthi shooting ballistic missiles at Israel all throughout the war. Now that it's not to say that Israel is not keeping an eye on the situation, it certainly is, and the Houthis certainly something that could rear its ugly head in the future. Let's not forget that the Houthis are basically a proxy of Iran. They get their directions from Tehran. They're part of this proxy war throughout the Middle East between Shiite, led by Iran, and Sunnis, led in part by Saudi Arabia. So the issue of the Houthis is far greater than Israel. Israel's not going to get involved beyond perhaps helping in intelligence, and if they were ever to be attacked again. So I don't think the Houthis are going to be Israel's major headache moving forward. So I don't think there's going to be anything done by Israel at this point. As long as the Houthis are not shooting at Israel, Israel will not shoot at the Houthis. And I think that's been demonstrated in the few weeks since the ceasefire. And with that, I think we're coming to the end of our session. Thank you very much. Sorry, at the moment, we don't have a co-presenter, so I have to do this myself. I have to look at the questions and ask myself the questions. So please bear with me. And it's going to get a little bit of getting used to from my point of view as well. But I hope it will become more smooth in the future. And with that, I will say good night from Israel, and I hope you join me this time next week. Thank you very much.